This is the Janine Pirro Show. Now, here's Judge Janine Pirro.
Welcome back to the Judge Janine Tunnel to Towers Foundation Show. Joining us now is an individual who is absolutely brilliant. We're thrilled to have him on the show today. Andy McCarthy, I'm sure you've seen him on Fox News. He's a contributor there. He's a former U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York, which is, of course, a prestigious district. And he actually prosecuted the Sheikh Mohammed case several years ago. He writes for the National Review, and he's really smart. So I'm going to hit it with him right away. Andy McCarthy, thanks so much for being with us. You are an expert when it comes to the interpretation of a lot of the federal laws. And, you know, the president often quotes you, and he's always proud of the fact that Andy McCarthy supports him on X, Y, or Z. There is a little distance, though, on some of the immigration issues. And now that we're in the thick of this thing, whether it's with the campuses or with cases involving, people like Abrego Garcia, there's a lot of different interpretations of the law, and people don't understand it. Can you just give us a primer on what the powers are of the president in terms of the Alien Enemies Act, in terms of visa holders, and in terms of illegals?
Well, Judge, the immigration laws, the way they've been interpreted the last century plus, are in a kind of a thicket where the Supreme Court has taken something that was originally a state responsibility. At the time of the original founding of the country, what was clear was that the states had authority to remove trespassers from their territory, and what was unclear is what the federal authority was, because there's nothing in the Constitution that gives the federal government explicitly control over immigration enforcement. The courts kind of inferred it from the responsibilities of border security and the fact that Congress has the power to set the conditions for naturalization. And what inevitably happens, I think, when the courts kind of begin to find a federal role in something is over time, the federal role swallows the state role. And as a result, we now have the courts basically saying that immigration enforcement is a paramount federal responsibility, but it's a responsibility of Congress. So to the extent the president has authority, it's all the authority that comes from the immigration laws that Congress has enacted. Fortunately for the president, those immigration laws give him immense power to the point that he can do something in the immigration area that I don't think we could do as prosecutors.
Interesting. Okay.
As prosecutors, we can't criminalize or penalize constitutionally protected activity.
Right, like freedom of speech, the right to protest.
Right. On the other hand, in the immigration area, we've had law on the books since the early Cold War. I want to put it like, sometime in the 50s, this was enacted, where based on an assessment by the Secretary of State, the government can retract a visa or a green card and take any class of alien, including lawful permanent resident, which is the highest class, and expel them from the country if the Secretary of State, in his judgment, decides that their presence here and their activities are detrimental to American foreign policy interests.
Right.
That law makes people uncomfortable. I think it makes judges uncomfortable because it kind of rubs against our First Amendment grain. But it's a law, and it's been on the books for a long time.
Okay, so let's focus on that, Andy. So, if the government has the power to retract, whether, you're a green card holder, you're a lawful resident, and once the Secretary of State determines that you shouldn't be here, but what are the criteria that he can use to determine that? And then what are the legal avenues that he must use, may use, or can use?
Yeah, I think what your question hits on is probably the most important area or aspect of this constitutional issue, because in a lot of these areas, we always ask what criteria should the judge use. Here, constitutionally, the more basic question is who gets to decide. And it's relevant for purposes of immigration because, as the courts have said again and again, including the Supreme Court, immigration enforcement, who gets to be in this country and who has to leave, is a political decision, not a legal one. and it's really committed in our system to the political branches. So it would be very presumptuous, in my view, for a court to second-guess Secretary Rubio if he's made an assessment that somebody's presence in the country is detrimental to U.S. foreign policy interests, because he's the one. The voters voted for President Trump to run American foreign policy. President Trump picked in the Senate, I think unanimously confirmed, Secretary Rubio to be the president's main actor as far as implementing U.S. foreign policy is concerned. So who is a judge, unelected, non-political official, to second-guess what the Secretary of State says is detrimental to U.S. foreign policy?
But that's what's happening, Andy. That's what's happening.
Well, it's not happening yet. I mean, there's the problem here is what happened here is that if the administration had just gone by the normal immigration laws and had given notice to these aliens that they want to kick out, that they need to show up for immigration proceedings, then they would have had an immigration hearing at the Justice Department. They would have had we call them immigration judges. They're not really judges or courts. That's a component of the Justice Department. And then that decision gets reviewed by something called the Board of Immigration Appeals, which is also part of the Justice Department and can actually be countermanded by the Attorney General. And then under our law, they cut out the district judges. You get a one-shot appeal to a circuit court, and the circuit court's jurisdiction has been narrowed by Congress, so they can only review purely legal questions. Now, I don't think there's any doubt. I think you're right that if one of these cases got to the circuit court, they would review the question of whether, Rubio had the authority to do what he did. But I think he'd win. So I think here's
the issue that people are not getting. The issue is, if you've got these immigration judges and they work in the Department of Justice, and you've got, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, saying, that their interests are against our foreign policy issues. I mean, this is all, it seems, within the president's ambit and foreign policy ambit. How does a local district court judge get involved? That's number one. And number two, how can we possibly give, let's talk about the students now. How can we possibly give them hearings? There are too many of them. Do we have enough judges?
Well, we don't have enough judges. I mean, that's a whole nother problem.
Yeah.
We have excellent laws on the books, but Congress hasn't funded them. So, for example, the example I always use is we have 20 million illegal aliens. That's the best estimate that I've been able to find in the country, like somewhere between 18 and 21 million.
Yeah.
Congress has authorized 47,600 detention spaces.
Jesus.
And even though we have expedited legal processes on the books for getting these people out, as you know and I know, as a practical matter, you have to be able to hold people for a week or two in order to get through this process. And if you have that amount of prison space, I did the math at one point, it's less than 0.5%.
Right, exactly.
of the resources we need. So that's one problem. The other problem is the way that they've gone about trying to get these legal aliens out is, instead of just giving them notice to show up for an immigration hearing, what they've done is arrested them and detained them and then tried to move them from the northeastern part of the country to the Fifth Circuit, where I think the administration thinks it has a better shot with the courts if things come up. And the result of that is if you arrest and detain a person under circumstances where you don't have to do that, then that person gets to file a habeas corpus petition
in the district court.
And that results in all these district judges now being in the equation when they really shouldn't be in the equation.
But Andy, let me ask you this. If you give them notice to appear, I mean, it's kind of, look, you're a former prosecutor and I am too. There are a lot of people that you don't want to give notice to because they're going to take off. Especially if you've got like Mohammed Khalil or one of these guys, these protesters who have a student visa, say, we're going to bring you to immigration court. And he says to himself, well, I don't have a shot there if Marco Rubio thinks that I'm doing something that's against the national foreign policy. I mean, there is an argument to be made that, hey, wait a minute, I'm not going to give you notice. I'm going to round you up. I know what you're saying, though, about sending them down south, which is what they did with Muhammad Khalil. I think he's still in Louisiana, isn't he?
I think he's in Louisiana. There's a judge in Jersey who who has that habeas petition and may try to order him back. I know that with respect to Rumeysa Ozturk,
right, the woman,
the Second Circuit upheld the district judge who ordered that she be brought back to Vermont. There's another guy from Columbia too, whose name is, I think, Moshin Madawi, who's also got a argument before the Second Circuit. He wants to be brought back to Vermont too. I hear what you're saying. I just think the usual risk of flight thing with aliens is that if they're illegal aliens, they don't have any real ties to the community.
Right.
And a lot of them are dangerous. So you would almost always arrest and detain them.
Right.
On the other hand, these are the people we're talking about now, even though they've been involved in pro-Hamas activism, the government hasn't alleged that they're members or that they're associated with Hamas. They have no criminal records, and they want to fight to stay in the country as opposed to flee the country. So I think, at least in the first round, if it were my call, I'm not saying that you're wrong or that there aren't two ways of looking at this, but I think they would have been in better shape if they had just ordered people to show up at hearings, because what it looks like to these Southern District and Second Circuit judges is that the government was afraid to litigate in New York. And I think they have a strong case under the statute. I think they would win this wherever they litigated it, and they shouldn't act like they need to get to the Fifth Circuit to win.
This National Foster Care Month, Marine Toys for Tots is providing hope to children who need it most. Staff Sergeant James Caldwell, who grew up in foster care himself, shares that while handing out gifts at a Toys for Tots distribution event, a little girl looked up at him, reached into her bag, pulled out a stuffed animal and said, "Someone needs to make sure you get a toy too." That simple gesture embodies the heart of Marine Toys for Tots, ensuring every child, including those in foster care, experiences the kindness that can transform their future. Visit toysfortots.org today.
Smart Water Alkaline with antioxidant. 9.5 plus pH, now in cans.
Refreshing.
Made for every way you move.
Should I run a marathon?
Let's start with finishing that water. Smart Water Alkaline with antioxidant, now in a sleek can. For those with a taste for taste. Grab yours today.
PMS, pregnancy, menopause. Being a woman is a lot. Ollie supports you and yours with expert solutions for every age and life stage. They just launched 2 new products exclusively at Walmart. Period Hero combats bloat, mood swings, and more during PMS. And Balance Perimeno to support hormonal balance, mood, and metabolism during perimenopause. Grab yours at Ollie.com.
Ollie!
These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
Americans love using their credit cards, the most secure and hassle-free way to pay. But D.C. politicians want to change that with the Durbin-Marshall credit card bill. This bill lets corporate megastores pick how your credit card is processed, allowing them to use untested payment networks that jeopardize your data security and rewards. Corporate megastores will make more money, and you pay the price. Tell Congress to guard your card, because Americans lose when politicians choose. Learn more at guardyourcard.com.
Well, very interesting that you're talking about the president, that the administration would win it. And, I do too. But it's kind of interesting. Where I disagree is whether or not the notice. But judges would look at it differently. But, then the question is it within the exclusive jurisdiction of the executive authority? But let's talk about what's going on in the colleges. And I'm thrilled to have you on. If you're listening, tuning in now, it's Andy McCarthy. Who's a brilliant legal mind on all of these federal issues. Now we've got Brooklyn College. They're going crazy. Columbia University. Apparently they invited the police on campus to make those 80 arrests. Apparently 56 of them, or whatever the number is, they were actual students. And I got to tell you, Andy McCarthy, what I love is that that they locked them in the library that they were trying to take over and said, "You're not leaving until we get your ID so that we can identify you." And I honestly think they should put their pictures up on websites so that these kids don't get jobs that people understand who they're hiring. But talk about the fact that they closed the library doors and said, "You're not getting out unless you give us ID and tell us who you are." because they've been
Yeah,
wrapping themselves in the keffiyehs and masks because they're cowards, obviously.
Yeah, well, this is close to my heart because I went to Columbia, so
Did you?
I would crash for exams in Low Library, and
Exactly.
last year they occupied Hamilton Hall, which is where you take most of your classes the first year in the college there. So it's good to see them finally crack down on this. I was particularly happy to see that the Southern District and Harmeet Dillon, in one of the first things she's done at the Civil Rights Division, has charged a guy a couple of days ago with 3 counts of assault under the civil rights statutes, assaults of Jewish people who were attacked at these rallies. These are like sort of pro-Hamas demonstrators that, the media keeps calling them anti-Israel protesters. They're pro-Hamas.
Pro-Hamas, exactly.
Demonstrators. And Hamas has been a designated foreign terrorist organization under American law since we started that process in the mid-'90s. Before we even knew who Al-Qaeda was.
Interesting.
Hamas and Hezbollah were the first organizations that were designated. So I think this is all stuff that has to be done. My biggest complaint during the Biden administration was because the Islamists are an important constituency, and I want to be clear now, I'm talking about Islamists. This is people who are adherent to Sharia supremacy. I'm not talking about just terrorists, right?
Right.
But because they were an important constituency for the Democrats, Biden was scared to death to do anything about the atrocious stuff that's gone on since October 7th. And I know, and I'm sure you probably feel this way as well as a former prosecutor, if you had taken 4 or 5 high-profile cases and prosecuted these people under the civil rights laws and set the tone that this kind of stuff is not going to be tolerated, we wouldn't have had the problems that we had in the months after October 7th. And we wouldn't have had all this crazy stuff that went on at the campuses.
You're
but I
so
think
right.
This happened for 2 reasons. Number one, the administration wouldn't enforce the civil rights laws, the Biden administration. And number 2, and I've been a broken record on this since I did terrorism cases and then wrote about it after the 90s.
You're a voice in the wilderness, Andy.
Well, on this one I was.
I know.
The Muslim Students Associations were started by the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States in the mid-1960s. They had about a handful of them. Now there's over 600 chapters in campuses across North America, not just the United States. And they turn these campuses, whenever there's Israeli issues, which there always seem to be, they turn them into cauldrons of pro-Hamas agitation and anti-Semitism.
Right.
And that's a problem we've created for 3 generations.
Yeah. And, the sad part about all this is that, we are victims of our own inaction. And as you say, and as so many have said before you and in the past several decades, what you don't address is going to come back to bite you. And, the perfect example on a very low level is Colombia. I mean, we thought it was over last year. The police came in, they made arrests, they were going to be prosecuted. Alvin Bragg, the DA in Manhattan, drops the cases. So the message is there are no consequences, have at it. And unfortunately, they did it again. But I got to tell you, kudos to Claire Shipman. I'm sure that she was really squeezed. And obviously to Donald Trump, who said, you know what? Enough of this. You're not getting any money. You're going to lose your tax exempt status. We're not going to allow you people to come on American campuses, especially if you're on a student visa, and, create all of this chaos. It's chaos, Andy. It's just sheer chaos. And, I can see you in the library, 30 years ago or whatever. The way I was, we're on lockdown, hysterical, and then some lunatic comes in and starts waving a Palestinian flag as if we have time for this nonsense.
Well, look, it's exactly right. We let it go on for too long, and we had every sign that we shouldn't let it go on. But I do think, the president has a knack for coming out on the right side of these like 70-30, 80-20 issues. And this is a powerful one in the country. The majority of the country, as opposed to the activist part of the Democratic base. The vast majority of the country wants this stuff stopped. And
of course they do.
If the Justice Department shows under Trump that they're the agents of stopping this, it becomes very obvious that the Democrats are the agents of exacerbating it and catalyzing it. And that's an important division in the country.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Andy McCarthy, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully, we'll not have to deal with this, but I suspect you and I will be talking about this in the very near future again. Thank you so much for your time, Andy. All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
It's the Judge Janine Show.
Hello, folks. Larry Kudlow here. Pay attention, because China is leading the largest anti-American alliance since World War II. One that's already dumped U.S. bonds, grabbed 43 million acres of our farmland, and is plotting to dethrone the dollar. That's why IRA and 401k savers are protecting their savings with gold. Please go to freegoldguide.com/Kudlow or just call 800-621-3908 for your free gold guide on how to protect your wealth with gold 100% tax-free.